What's the worst wedding you've ever been to? Story 1. I used to photograph weddings. This one took the cake. The bride was doing shots at 8 a.m. in the bridal suite getting ready. She then has the maid of honor call one of the guys to make sure they get plastic bottles or vodka, not glass. They were riding on motorcycles and she didn't want to take a chance of the bottles breaking if they fell off. The guy she was marrying she knew for about 2 months. He had 4 different kids by 4 different women. How do I know this? He has all of their names tattooed on his arm. Nothing is crossed out, just their names in a row. She told me the significance and then bragged she'd be the 5th on his arm. The reception was a show. They passed through a Harley dealership and were an hour late to the reception from the ceremony. A drunken squad of bikers with bride and bridesmaids on the back of their bikes. One guy hit a car in the parking lot because he was so blitzed. By the end of the night, the bride was passed out on a table while the groom was doing shots with other ladies at the reception. Took great photos for them. Edit. I don't have the photos anymore. This was back in 2006. I do remember my favorite being the bride and groom both drinking mini shots. For some reason, she was kneeling in front of him and he was gripping her head while they both did shots. Story 2. This was a wedding reception. There was a swingers group that would host parties at a bar inside a hotel. Well, the hotel also booked a wedding reception for the same night as the swingers party. Well, the groom ended up hooking up with an older lady there and was caught leaving her room. Groom was slapped and punched. Bride was raging, crying, and screaming. Groomsmen had zero idea what to do and were similarly plastered. Groom was fairly drunk and got a nose after she punched him in the face a few times. Both families were screaming at each other, and bridesmaids were being held back by staff and other family members. They looked more than ready to rip that guy apart. Cops got called, and everyone was kicked out. That night was the talk of the town and group for a while. The hotel made sure to not book receptions and swingers on the same night from now on. Story 3. I attended a family wedding where the groom told his mother-in-law about an hour before the ceremony that he didn't like her. There were a lot of tears, but the bride married him anyway. After the reception, he got drunk and tossed his wedding ring into a field, and a wedding guest found it the next morning. Somehow they are still married, but I don't have a lot of hope for their future. Story 4 went to a dry wedding in August. We were in a tent with no circulation. I was sweaty. Speeches were done before the dinner. The maid of honor had a 45-minute slideshow of pictures of her and the bride. It was legitimately the worst wedding I've ever been to, and I've been to a wedding where the bride had a camo dress on. Story 5. Groom's mother came to the bride's room where we were all snacking and getting ready and generally having a good time, listening to music and doing hair and makeup. She wanted to say some heartfelt message to the bride. Now the bride's father had passed away not long before, so we were doing everything we could to keep things upbeat and positive. Mother of the groom proceeds to tell her all about how her dad is looking down from heaven in happy tears and how he hates to miss this day, and bride starts crying. Not just crying, full-on ugly crying. Her makeup is now in her décolletage and her nose is red and running. The Mog hands her back to us by saying, "Oh dear, she can't walk down the aisle like this," and leaves the room. We spend half an hour calming the bride down, cooling her face, fixing her makeup. The ceremony started late, and the maid of honor had just a basic ponytail because we had to spend so much time on damage control. The bride spent most of the reception just sitting and looking exhausted. The Emog danced her socks off. Fuck you, Brenda, for sabotaging the day. I've disliked you ever since, you selfish hag. Story 6. Former wedding DJ here. This isn't my story, but one told to me by another, female DJ, as we were unpacking our gear after our gigs on a Saturday night. Cole's notes. The bride was a wreck the whole day, and the family kept feeding her pills to keep her from bolting, Valium or some such. She was so out of it that after the first dance, she just sat down on the dance floor, leaned over, and fell asleep. Family dragged her to the wall and left her there while they partied. Mill's speech ended with, "And if you ever lay a hand on her in anger again, I will kill you myself." Groom tried to convince the DJ to go party in the parking lot, and when she firmly declined, he went and got a bridesmaid instead. She found them going to town bent over the hood of a car in the parking lot when she was packing up. Story 7. Brother's wedding in December in the Northwest. They had all the guests show up 2 hours before the ceremony with nowhere to wait with no warning. As in, we did not have access to the church or reception building until the ceremony started. No seats, no protection from the elements, no bathrooms, no food or drink. People dressed in their absolute best wandered on the lawns in the cold wind for a while before just getting back into their cars to avoid freezing while the wedding party took photos. We watched in our cars in the parking lot as they took photos around the grounds. Eventually, an hour and a half later, someone from the wedding party had to go car to car and tell people they could go onto the heated church for the ceremony. Some left instead. The bride's side is from money, so a lot of her guests were pissed beyond reason and spent their time looking for a manager and spreading hate and discontent. Groom's side hunkered down, stayed silent while polite and supportive, and built the foundations of a grudge that will never go away. The ceremony and reception were beautiful, but everything was tainted with resentment for being disregarded like that by the couple. Everyone was pissed, but pretending to be happy and polite considering how much money it obviously all cost. Then people got drunk. The energy got dangerous. We left before the fights broke out. It was crazy to learn they spent enough money to buy a house on their wedding, but didn't consider their guests enough to provide a warm, safe place for their families to wait while they did their own thing. It made everyone feel like a pawn in their wedding game. Story 8. We had to get up before dawn, drive up a mountain to stare into the rising sun while the minister read a passage from all of the 7 major world religions. Then, the bride and groom threw rice on us. The wedding cake was gluten-free, wheat-free, sugar-free, tasted like a wax candle. Story 9. Wife and I got dragged to her friend's mother's wedding. I think it was her 3rd marriage. Other than it being super awkward, it went off without a hitch. The reason for it being awkward was the son of the bride was involved in the murder of the groom's nephew. He went with some friends to buy drugs, but turns out they didn't have any intention of paying for them. The bride's son was at the wedding. He was charged with murder and pleaded down to something that got him multiple years probation. Story 10. Friend's wife thought it would be great if guests had to pay an entrance fee ticket for their wedding. It wasn't cheap either. Her reason is people spend that much for concerts. Why shouldn't people spend it on seeing 2 rock stars getting wed? I paid the price for my friend, though lol, had to bring a gift as well. The entrance fee was paid in advance because the wedding had limited seating. Good thing my friend was loved by everyone because I did not see a single friend from the bride, except for family. Her bridesmaid were her sisters. Context. They had a love for music and they didn't hire wedding singers for the reception. So basically it was a wedding and concert because the newlywed put out a performance for us. The ticket was like $100 for a country where $150 was the minimum monthly wage. For the record, they sent out the invitation for like 10 months or a year in advance, so people had plenty of time to scrounge up for the ticket. Good voices though, still shitty because it was like being forced to pay for a 30-minute concert that I didn't want to go to. Love my friend to death, so it was great to hear him sing, and I don't regret going even for a second. Story 11. Went to one at a fire hall where they ran out of ziti halfway through the buffet line and were sending people out to buy more food from KFC. Bride was out of her dress and in neon green booty shorts and a black tank top before dinner was even served. They're divorced now. Story 12. At the reception, the groom and bride cut the cake. Groom thought it was funny to smash cake on bride's face, right after she told him not to do that. Bride left and did not return. It was uncomfortable. I never heard how long the marriage lasted. Story 13. A family member wedding day was ruined by a storm. Most of the invited people couldn't make it. The church windows exploded in the middle of the wedding, and then the lights went off, and she married anyway in the dark, and my family just used the phones as flashlights. I laughed my off just thinking that maybe God really didn't want her to marry that day. It was a disaster. But hey, at least they laughed a lot and they are still married. Story 14. I was a bridesmaid in an outdoor wedding where the ceremony took place at a gazebo in a garden. I missed the rehearsal due to work, but followed along with the groomsmen I was paired with. I'm not sure the issue was addressed at the rehearsal, but there was a beehive under the gazebo. Loud music and sound equipment, lots of hairspray and perfume smells, people stomping on the gazebo taking pics and such. The bees were not happy. The whole wedding party was swatting and cringing. The officiant was rushing things as much as he could to get us out of there. I never saw the wedding video, but I'm sure it was a complete mess. Story 15. Had a female cousin get married in a Southern Baptist ceremony. It was all about her being subservient and listening to him, letting him make all the important decisions. It was as bad as you can imagine. I kept tapping my wife and telling her we needed to renew our vows in this church while laughing. They were married only a few months. Story 16. I went to a wedding where the groom was left standing at the altar. The bride's dad walked to the front, told everyone that his daughter had changed her mind, and he insisted that everyone should to go to the reception hall to enjoy the music and food. At the reception hall, a brawl broke out between the two families that escalated among some guests taking sides. Plates were thrown, tables knocked over, ice sculptures knocked over, and in the fracas a small child was injured, cut by something on her forehead, and an elderly guest began having chest pains and collapsed. Management called the police and for an ambulance. I left through the kitchen. Story 17. The bride snapped her fingers at me and barked, "Dresser," in front of all the guests because she wanted her train adjusting for the photo shoot. Didn't even have the courtesy to look me in the eye. Just snapped her fingers and pointed. Story 18. I realize now that this wedding was. I was 8 at the time and had to go because my cousin 20 years older than me was getting married to him. We got to the wedding and she was greeting everyone instead of getting ready. The groom was nowhere to be seen, understandable. They aren't supposed to see each other until she walks down the aisle. We walked past the bar to get into the area that I can't remember the name of ATM, but we see him getting drinks with his friends. When the ceremony starts, he looks extremely bored and is whispering things to his friends/groomsmen. Still doing this when she walks down the aisle. She had to pull his sleeve to get him to say the vows. Later at the dinner, they are both not at their table, but in the main hall, and he is yelling at her for pulling his sleeve at the altar. Needless to say, they are now divorced, but were married for a month until he divorced her, because she wasn't meeting his expectations about what she should be doing instead of working a full-time job. Fuck you, Mark. Story 19. Biel's wedding. They did the smash the cake in each other's face, but he kind of punched her in the face with some cake. She ran off to the bathroom with the ladies, and it was just awkward after that. Story 20. The one where the best man decided to do his speech standing in front of the bride and groom. To really rub salt into the wound, his speech consisted almost entirely of vivid descriptions of the groom's extensive sexual exploits. Unsurprisingly, the bride walked out and locked herself in the toilet. Story 21. Ex-best friend's wedding. She's my ex-best friend for several reasons, but this is one of said reasons. This happened back in 2014. I'm invited to her wedding, taking place in the middle of July, July 17th. It was a very hot, dry summer to begin with, and I'm expected to wear a tuxedo. Something she was aware of I hated wearing, but I figured, hey, it's a wedding, so why not? I show up to the reception, people are being let in. I show the dude I assumed was the best man my wedding invitation, and ex-BF shows up. The following dialogue is from memory, so it's not 100% accurate, but you get the idea. Her. Oh, hey, Mick. Sorry, I have to tell you something. Me. What's up? Her. You're not allowed inside. Me. I stared at her for a good 10 seconds before asking why the not. Her. Oh, because no one knows you here. Me. You asterisk invited asterisk me. I have the wedding invitation right here. Her. Yeah, but you can just stay outside and wait. Me. You realize I had to go halfway across the country to get here, right? Her. Yeah. Me. And now you're telling me I'm not invited inside. Is anyone else not invited inside? Her. Nope, just you. Sorry about this mess, so I'm there. It's about 25C, but approximately 77F. I'm wearing a black tuxedo and is expected to stand outside in the blazing sun. I asked her if I could just go home instead of wasting my time, which for some reason she took offense to, saying that if I did, our friendship meant nothing to me. I had known her for 12 years at that point. Me. Fine, but I'll need food and something to drink anyway. Her. Oh, sorry, we didn't factor into you coming, so there won't be enough for you. I left then and there. Thankfully, I did have a friend who let me crash at his place until I could leave the following day. Her wedding lasted about 8 months. She's now on marriage 3, and I've turned the invitations to both her other weddings, which were also during the summer, because no way am I reliving that. Story 22. I worked this one. It was a dramatic shift, but everyone left, so I got off early and the bride left a big tip to apologize. I'd rather have worked late and got a smaller tip if it meant she had the wedding of her dreams. The father of the bride got into quite an aggressive argument with best man. Best man was brother of the groom, because he had hit on his niece who was 17. The best man didn't know she was 17 and was actually only 19 himself, but understood it definitely not okay as she was still a minor. He was mortified when he found out and was confronted with it. It was awkward, but they agreed it was a misunderstanding, and the night went on. A lot of drinks later, they were all on the dance floor. I was collecting glasses, so I happened to be in the center of this. The best man was chatting to the 17-year-old to the side of the dance floor, and I heard he was apologizing to her for what had happened earlier. I definitely was not lingering to hear their conversation. Because it was a genuine apology, the following events were completely unnecessary. The father of the bride saw them talking and without hesitation came over and punched the best man square in the face. Upon seeing this, the groom ran over to the father of the bride and punched him back. This ended up in a full-on brawl between multiple, very drunk members of the family. The bride got in between them to break it up, and she unfortunately got hit and her eye started to swell. I managed to swoop in and take her off as my manager came running out the kitchen to break it up. The bride was in tears. Her day ruined. The bride, her mother, and stepdad hung around to the pay the bar tab and clear their belongings and explained to me that she hadn't wanted to invite her dad. He always causes problems and was very aggressive and argumentative, and she knew he would somehow ruin her day, but she invited him to save drama before the wedding. She also explained that her husband punching him wasn't just because he hit her brother, but was from years of him having to sit back and see her deal with his behavior. The dad was ruining her day, just like she thought he would, and then managed to assault his brother. The police were called, but nobody pressed charges, unfortunately. I'd love to know where they are now. I hope they managed to have a very happy life together. Story 23. Probably my own. We just rented a movie theater, got married, then watched Ninja Turtles. We loved it, but everyone I tell about it says it sounds horrible. It cost $700. Edit. There were like 50 other people there too. We got married up front, then watched the movie. It was one of those theaters that serves drinks and food. Story 24. I was playing for a summer international traveling soccer team as a senior in high school. 4 of us were with a host family in Costa Rica for a 2-week stint. The hosts were a couple whose kids had grown and moved out. Ahead of time, we were invited to a wedding on the weekend we were there. I thought it sounded pretty cool, so I and my parents in the US agreed. It was at a place called Vista Verde, which is like a jungle retreat with lodge and bungalows. We thought it was pretty cool. It was a nice normal wedding with about 200, 300 people, I would guess. At the reception, I was flirting with a beautiful girl a little older than me. I was the American that nobody knew which kind of helped me with some attention from the Bonitas, pretty ones. I was having as much fun as a 17-year-old kid could have. Clean fun, but flirty fun. Everyone was having fun until we hear gunshots, and all of a sudden a swarm of black fatigue rifle-toting guys stormed in. They were yelling to get down and hands manos arriba, hands up. Of course, we all freaked out, but I was a little slow in translating and was still standing to see everyone else down. I got a nice little push from a rifle stock, apparently hit my head on the ground and blacked out. I woke up a minute later zip-tied and thrown in a bus. I spent 9 hours in a school gym, along with most of the other guests. Luckily, once they got to processing me and saw my passport, they called the US Embassy. I finally found out that the police believed the wedding had members of a local gang, and that drugs and guns were being sold. I was immediately moved to the embassy along with my other teammates as our hosts were detained for days. I'll break to say if that were the case, they were the nicest dressed and behaved gang I've ever seen. I had a nasty headache, and my parents wadded a lot of money on the trip. We didn't get to play in the national tournament. Never found out what happened to the host family or what was found at the wedding. I never got my camera or film back that had pictures of the previous week where we got to sightsee. It also had rolls of film from Mexico and San Diego, where we also played. That to me is the worst part 20 years later. Having nothing in way of memories of one of the best 2 months of my life. Story 25. A family member's wedding in October 2020, when COVID lockdowns were still going strong. They didn't believe COVID was real. The invites were via Facebook. If you didn't have Facebook, you would get a screenshot of the Facebook invite via text. We had to bring our own chair, our own drinks, and our own chairs, and were reminded to bring gifts. The ceremony was in a farm field. We all stood around because we had no idea where to go. The music was played off an iPhone and was so windy that no one could hear it. The bride came riding down on a horse, and her father was wearing a full cowboy outfit and hat. The bridesmaids all wore mixed, vibrant colored dresses and had no idea what they were doing or where to go. The reception took place on what was supposed to be a very large tent for spacing. It fit maybe 20 of the 80 people that came. My partner and I ended up leaving to eat elsewhere because the dinner was everyone bringing a dish to pass during COVID. We later found out the photographers were upset because they thought they were hired for a 2-hour couple's photo shoot and not a wedding. Many people also got COVID. We did not. Story 26. A friend of mine's first wedding. I was friends with both bride and groom. From what we'd seen over the 2 years they'd been together, their relationship was fun and happy. She's super sweet and just the most genuinely nice girl. A bit sheltered but fierce and ready to make the most of life. He was quite funny and chill. Could be moody at times, but he would bounce back quick and was smart and fun to talk to. We're all a bunch of nerds, so we met through extracurricular competitions held between our schools. They started with a very formal religious ceremony that took forever. When we got to the reception, my friend was still too young to drink, and while she seemed happy, I could tell something was off. The groom was very cold and indifferent to everyone. We found this odd as we'd all been friends since grade school, and it wasn't normal for him. Bride was still only 20, so too young to drink, but the groom was 22, so it wasn't a dry reception, thankfully. I left right after they dipped out of the reception for their honeymoon. I didn't hear from her for 6 months. When she came back, she told me that they got divorced a month later. Groom had been sleeping with the MOH for months because my friend had wanted to save herself. He confessed this on their honeymoon, after they consummated, by handing her his phone with texts from the MOH while he went to shower. Nobody talks to the groom anymore, myself included. Honestly, I'm not even sure he still lives here. Happy ending though, she met a wonderful man about a year later. They have been married for like 6 years now, and their wedding was a blast. Best one I ever attended hands down, and I despise weddings just in general. As a close second, my brother's second wedding like a year ago, where they had to get remarried to have their marriage recognized as valid by the Catholic Church. My brother is barely religious, not in any formal way at least, and I know he did it to please my Sael, and while I love her, I hate how forced the whole thing feels. Story 27. I was the best man at a Catholic wedding. I was behind the altar watching the guests arrive when the officiating priest suddenly embraced me from behind. I had to literally pry the little guy off me. Not a great beginning. After the ceremony, my wife and I were shocked at how cheap and perfunctory the reception was. It was held in the church basement. There was no alcohol at a Catholic wedding. In fact, not even soft drinks, and it didn't seem like the heat was working. We played the piano and sang a bit in an attempt to lighten the mood, but the new couple left abruptly after only half an hour. Years later, the groom told me, "We left because my wife is in love with *you. She always has been." Oops. Awkward. I didn't have the nerve to ask, "Then why did you get married at all?" I suppose she was pregnant. Story 28. Bride's parents were very messily and bitterly divorced. Father of the bride was a raging alcoholic who made no effort to hide the fact he hated the groom and thought he was a worthless POS. Father-daughter dance was set to I Loved Her First by Heartland, with her father glaring at the groom and flipping him off the entire time. The room was dead silent and no one was making eye contact. Super awkward. During speeches, her dad went on an angry, drunken rant about how his new son-in-law was lucky there were so many witnesses, or he'd have already been dragged out back and shown who the real man in the family was, before being literally wrestled to the ground by some groomsmen and having the mic taken away, while still drunkenly yelling insults. Bride spent most of the wedding in tears. It was full of gross innuendo and incestuous vibes, and people were literally leaving before the food came because it was so uncomfortable. Story 29 1H45M ceremony. They not only hadn't while dating, they never kissed. So the whole thing was this big build-up to the greatest kiss ever. Awful. Both were pastor kids. Both pastor gave insanely long sermons. Both did altar calls. Then releasing doves, etc., etc., etc. I just couldn't believe how self-indulgent everything was. I'm annoyed just recalling it. Story 30. I dodged a terrible wedding a few years ago. The wedding of the child of a frankly horrible person who was married to a member of my family. The parent and child cornered me in the hospital, as the family member was dying horribly, and made me promise to go. I managed to add a basic decency-based condition to my promise, which the parent predictably broke. When I didn't turn up at the wedding, they were furious. Also, shortly after they made me promise to go, my dying family member made me promise never to speak to the parent and child again. I was much more inclined to keep that promise. They've always been awful to me, but also to everyone else in the family. So with the family member dead, almost no one in my family went to the wedding. They only wanted me there to make it look like my family doesn't hate them, and to make fun of the fact that I am unmarried. Unfortunately for the child, they're also horrible to everyone else, so almost all of the wedding attendees and all of the wedding party were made up of the child's spouse's family and friends. The child has no friends, and their parent has very few. No one out of the parent and child's family came. The child didn't even have a best man, woman of their own. They had to borrow their spouse's friend for that. The wedding had very few attendees, as in enough to fill a minibus. Sometimes people do get what they deserve. All identifiers held back because I like my tires unslashed. Story 31. My mom guilted me into being in her best friend's daughter's wedding. Wedding at the Mall of America. Reception at an old folks' home with a boombox. At least I got to use a bridesmaid dress more than once. Story 32. My brothers. His wife looked like a drag queen. Her basic family thought we came from the ghetto because we have black friends. Wouldn't even sit next to us or them. Their whole stupid family avoided us like the plague. At the reception, wife literally segregated the seating arrangement. When it dawned on us what she did, we all left. I don't give a who is getting married. I will not stand for that stupid. We took our gifts back on the way out. Story 33 went to one a couple years ago, started at 7 p.m. on a Friday night. Wedding was done, 150-person receiving line, 20-mile drive local roads in the dark to the reception which served dinner at 10 p.m. By 11:30, the cake wasn't cut yet, and we just left along with most of the guests by that point. Story 34. Outdoor ceremony in Texas in August. Not only was it hot, it also rained. Texas heat plus 1,000% humidity. The wedding party was late. We just sat and waited. Once the ceremony was over, we were allowed to enter the venue. The bartenders were dicks, and there was no food available for 2 hours. The DJ sucked. There was food, but not enough of it. At the end of the night, the bride was pushing trash cans around and helping with cleanup. Story 35. I traveled to NY for my cousin's wedding, along with about 30 other relatives and maybe 100 guests. We all had a huge rehearsal dinner and partied pretty late into the night. Around 8 a.m., my sister woke me and said our cousin had gotten cold feet and snuck away during the night. The bride and her family were furious, not the least because they had spent 10s of $1,000s of dollar on the reception. He wasn't missing. He called and said he was on his way to the beach. I felt sorry for the bride. It was so messy. Lots of hurt feelings and yelling. I snuck out to the airport and flew home. Needless to say, they never did get back together. Story 36. I once had a coworker who was into Asian girls. He was on his third mail-order bride and had invited us all to the wedding. It was in the back of a VFW post, and there was a poker tournament being held in the front. One of our coworkers left to enter the tournament. So we waited in this smoke-filled VFW post while the bride was late. He had her flown in that morning. Several of my coworkers had shown up already drunk to enjoy the show. She finally arrived and she was really small. He was a 300-plus man and pretty tall, and it was a bizarre sight. She quickly got ready in a broom closet. Not sure who the minister was, but he had obviously never performed the ceremony before, and he might have also started drinking early. During the vows, the groom actually said to move things along so he could get to the buffet. He had insisted on a waffle bar, and his mother and sister were furiously making waffles for everyone. There was also a rotating hot dog thing like you find in a 7-Eleven or something. The following night, he was back to work talking about being exhausted from not sleeping his wedding night. Wink, wink. Turns out he had slept on his couch because his new wife had taken over the bedroom with her cousins. Story 37. I used to work at a function center that did weddings. I will always maintain that there were two weddings where something really disturbed me. One, a groom slow dancing with his grandmother, nice, to Don't Chaw by the Pussycat Dolls, not so nice. And grandma had wandering hands, squick. Two, a direct copy of the Twilight Wedding. The bride had even changed her name to Bella, and the groom was a guy named Eddie. Bride kept correcting everyone, telling them to call him Edward. She wore contacts to give herself amber eyes. The dress was a replica. The first dance was to the Christina Perri song, and I heard many times, it needs to be just like in the movie. Story 38. My husband was the best man in his friend's wedding. After a 45 minutes very religious ceremony, bride is born-again Christian, groom is not religious, and none of his family are either. They started playing worship music from a radio. We thought nothing of it because, hey, it's her wedding, it's a song or two, and we're done. Nope. It was 27 minutes of these worship songs with her and her bridesmaids singing and dancing, while the groom just stood there, and all of his guests sat in complete silence. We were all baking in the sun and fending off stink bugs as they flew into our faces. The groom's father almost left in anger after the third song started, but was coaxed by his wife to wait it out. When we finally got to the reception, they started playing more worship music incredibly loud. I could have cried. I'm an atheist, but never judge anyone's religion, but that was a nightmare. No one was told it was happening, and everyone ended up sunburned, dehydrated, and cranky. Story 39. Probably my own. I'd been having doubts about going through with it. I was dressed and my mom was doing my hair when I had the sudden cold water thrown over me realization that I didn't want to marry this guy. I was stuck. I had family there that traveled cross-country to support me. I will never forget walking towards him and seeing his face. He didn't smile or cry, just blank. After, at the dinner and reception, he decided to spend his time out on the patio of the church. He had two friends at the wedding, and apparently they were more important to him than I was. I was dancing alone, talking to guests alone, and all the while feeling wrong. So yeah, mine. Story 40. A relative's friend's wedding where we knew nobody and everything took forever. The couple didn't account for what the guests would be doing when they were busy doing their own thing. So there were back-to-back hours of standing around a hall with no food or even music. Believe it or not, once you involve guests, the day isn't all about you. Story 41. The wedding started an hour late because at the last minute, the couple decided to wait until the sun was down. The reception was at the bar where the groom worked. It was a cash bar and didn't have assigned seating, so a big group of us were left without a table and had to stand at a standing half-table area where an in memory of display had been set up. We snuck out the door before any speeches or dancing and got burgers down the street. Story 42. Always post this when the subject comes up. Went to a wedding that my wife and I said will not last more than 2 years. The wedding was in the backyard of the bride's house. They had all the chairs and wedding arch set up outside. They set up a plastic tarp running down the aisle to walk on. Just before the wedding starts, there are darkening clouds appearing. Should have been a sign to move the wedding inside, but they invited too many people to the thing. Just as they start the wedding, it begins to rain lightly. The father of the bride is walking the bride down the lane and slips on the wet tarp and falls on his. Bride is now at the front, raining harder. People start to cover up with whatever they have. Some people start to get up too. Bride turns around and says to all, asterisk, asterisk, this is my wedding, no one is going to ruin it, you better all fucking sit your asses down. We all sit back down and the wedding resumes. It is now raining pretty good. The grass is now turning into mud. A few ladies in the crowd and the bridesmaids' makeup is now running down the faces. My wife has taken my jacket as a cover from the rain. They finish the vows and kiss, and then everyone runs to the house and garage to get out of the rain. Oh, remember how I said the grass was now mud? Yay, lots of people slipped and fell in the mud on the way to the house. We got to the house, many people looked terrible from the running makeup, muddy clothing, and soaking wet. A few of the women had to cover their chests and waists due to wet clothing becoming see-through. Most of the men were loaning their coats to the ladies to cover up. Dirty looks all around. The wedding cake was outside, and now brought in. The rain made the decorations on the cake turn all runny, and it looks horrible. The bride and groom began to cut the cake and feed each other. They smashed the cake pieces into each other's faces. Then began a food fight with each other. My friend's wife got hit in the face with purple icing cake on her face and dress. The priest got hit with and yellow icing on his white robe. There was nothing left of the cake to serve. Food being served was still frozen in the middle of the food, and the stuff that was not frozen was burned. The dessert was supped to be the cake, but as said above, there was nothing left. There was a goodie bag that people got on the way out. Had a lollipop, a coupon for ice cream cone at McDonald's, a pencil with the bride and groom name on it, and Halloween size M and Ms. My wife, whose dress was filthy, her makeup was out of, and her hair was a mess, said to me that she does not want to see those people again for 6 months. She was so mad. The couple divorced 11 months later when the groom came home from work and found his wife getting double-teamed by two guys.